Welcome, everyone. Happy Tuesday afternoon. I hope you're all experiencing the same beautiful weather that I am in Ohio today. So we're getting started. Please introduce yourselves in the chat. You can share your name, where you're joining us from, any particular interest you bring with you to this webinar. If you're a member or active with a mutual aid group, feel free to share that as well in the chat. This is the fifth in the series on disaster resiliency, co-hosted by the Central Appalachian Network and Reimagine Appalachia. And we like to have these webinars be casual. We like to see folks interacting in the chat and being active in the chat. So please feel encouraged to do so. As we're getting started, and you'll hear me say this a couple more times, but we do have translation available via captions. Sorry, we don't have live verbal translation, but if you want to enable your captions, you should see the option to transcribe those into the language of your choice. You'll want to choose English as the spoken language, and then the language of your choice as the caption language, because our speakers will be speaking in English. So as we're getting started, I want to note that thanks for folks introducing themselves in the chat. And if you're having trouble with the captions, translation captions, just send us a note. It's a little bit of a new technology for us. But it's been nearly a year since Hurricane Helene swept through the United States, carving a path that started in Florida's Big Bend region and speeding north into the southern Appalachians through Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, with impacts all the way up into Virginia and Kentucky. And the story of Helene's impact and the journey of communities to recover and build is only just beginning. There's still thousands of households that are displaced in North Carolina alone. Hurricane Helene was a uniquely terrifying event, but it was not a unique event. Communities across our region have been facing the impacts of increased flooding, often in places that have never seen flooding before in recent years. But at the same time, our communities are growing together and are ever resilient in the face of new challenges. And one of the ways that they are growing together and working to respond to this moment is called mutual aid, by creating mutual aid groups. These groups go beyond flood resiliency to broader community resilience efforts. So you'll be seeing a little bit of all of that in the presentations that we'll be sharing with you today. Mutual aid may be a kind of new word for some folks, but the concept is as old as Appalachia, which is that it's neighbors helping each other from the ground up. So today we'll hear from some of the groups that are continuing that Appalachian tradition of building community and helping each other when we need it. They're going to highlight the difference between charity and mutual aid and reflect on all the work that they've done and what's next. As we're getting started, we'd love to hear a little bit about some of you. So we do have a Menti poll, which if you've joined one of our webinars before, you'll be familiar with, and if not, welcome to Menti. So the way that you can interact with this poll is to click on the link, and then your answers will show up on the screen. And so we'd just like to hear a little bit from y'all about how would you describe mutual aid? What does it mean to you? Feel free to share concrete examples of the ways you've seen your community support each other in times of need, or to support each other to be more ready for when the next, incident comes around that folks need to be prepared for. So feel free to answer this question as concretely or abstractly as works for you. Building networks, relief efforts. Yeah. Building trust. Oh, I love the sewing COVID face masks. I sew, and I was just talking to somebody and they said, why don't you quilt as much anymore? And I said, I sewed too many face masks. I had to take a break. But what a time. It never occurred to me that my grandma teaching me to sew when I was younger would suddenly become part of some network of public health. I love seeing these beautiful answers coming up. Community gardens, Rooted in reality. Yeah. It's wonderful. Yeah. And so I'm going to move us to the next question, even though these answers are really fantastic. Just can't figure out how to do the poll. Yeah, if it doesn't work for you, I apologize. Sometimes that happens. You do need to click on the link, and it should, if you're on a different device, it would open up in a web browser by clicking that link. Or you can go to menti.com and input the code that's at the top of the slide. And if neither of those things work for you, we do understand that technology is always helpful till it's not. And so you can always put your answer in the chat and we'll see it there. So the next question is and it's at the same link, but how are some ways that you've engaged in mutual aid? Have you donated funds, supplies? Have you received support? Has someone you cared about received support? I believe you can choose more than one answer. I apologize if you can't. I usually make it so you can, because I suspect a lot of us might be able to click every single one of these boxes. And if your answer isn't included in this chart, please add it in the chat. Love to see it. When the multiple choice can never include all of the diversity of folks that are here. So we understand that. Wonderful to see so many people donating and so many people organizing and coordinating. Legal aid, that is a wonderful way that we see across the region is needed all the time. It's legal aid support. That's fantastic. I think we have most of the folks on the call have engaged in this one. That was quick. So I'm going to do just a little bit more. This is a new one for me. This one's you're supposed to pin your location on the map. Feel free to stick yourself in the ocean. We've never done it with a pin on the image, so you all are guinea pigs. If it doesn't work, that's okay. Feel free to share where you're joining us from in the chat. Oh, there's some little dots coming up. Usually we have folks fill out a little multiple choice as to where they're joining us from, but somebody requested a map and I thought, why not? That's kind of fun. I really struggled with the color on this one. I want y'all to know. I put some thought into it. And I'm second guessing myself. We're just about done with the polls. Just a nice, quiet way to get us started, learn from each other. I'm going to move to our first speaker, who will be Laura Saunders, sorry. Just a minute, joining us from Holler to Holler. So I'll give you all just another second to fill in where you're joining us from, and then we'll switch it over to Laura. So, all right, we have some support for the map. All right. Thank you for joining us, Laura. We'll get your slides up in just a second. If you want to start by just sharing where you're joining us from.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad to be here with everyone. It's so cool to see everybody's responses to this. What a nice way to start everything and kind of get a feel for what people are here for and what they're interested in and doing already. As Dana said, I am Laura. I work with the Mutual Aid Collective Holler to Holler, and we are based in the New River Valley of Virginia and in southern West Virginia. We have been organizing officially just since Helene, but have things that go back. Before I jump into that, we had talked about just sort of discussing the difference in charity versus mutual aid. I think that oftentimes they can get intermixed, or the term can get misused in some contexts, especially as it becomes more of like a hot buzzword almost in different spaces. But a lot of people have different understandings and words they might choose, but I think the core of it is just that mutual aid is about relationships. It's about trust. It's about love and care for each other and our communities. And it seeks to respond to systemic harms that are in place and power structures that are unequal in the harms they cause. and basically lets us create networks that are more sustainable and find ways that respond to either acute crisis or maybe ongoing crisis and neglect by really building time and care with each other and learning how to work together and create different areas that allow us to look after one another and really listen to each other rather than coming in and saying like, oh, I know what you need here. And another core feature of mutual aid that I personally just find so refreshing and beautiful, and part of why I love it so much, is that it's really just about horizontal power and creating something strong together rather than having people in charge and having people making unilateral decisions. It's about really learning how to become our own agents of change and of doing things that we want to see happening. And again, there's so many other things to talk about in that framework. And perhaps I can send some references that I've sort of found inspiring myself afterwards that could be shared. But I think as a synopsis, so I'm not rambling on too long about it, those are some of the core features of mutual aid that look really different than charity, which is much more about, trying to come in and act in a way that's more about like being a savior or getting attention or throwing money at something or wanting conditional support on things that then limit who is able to receive that support or what it might look like and the narratives around it. So it just really confronts a lot of the most harmful parts of our cultures and of our society that we see. And it allows us to come up together and make change that we want to see happen. So yeah, I'll just go ahead and go into some of the work that we've been doing with Holler to Holler. As I said, we're in the like mountains edge of Appalachia, and into like the coal fields of southern West Virginia. And what it has looked like is our first kind of earliest response was like very ragtag grassroots in its core. A handful of us got together to respond to the flooding in Eastern Kentucky. And for many of us, it was our first sort of experience with like horrific disaster relief work where you see just the kind of destruction that you can't really fathom, and needs that are already compounded and unmet, like is the case in so much of Appalachia. And that project of delivering supplies into Eastern Kentucky turned into a longer term service work project through App Studies at Virginia Tech. And then things kind of got quieter for a little while for us until Helene happened. And there was really bad flooding in this region too. Definitely not as severe as some parts of Western Carolina. But people were really in need. The New River flooded a lot of homes. And so what happened was just a lot of people sprang into action because that's what people know how to do here, as Dana was saying. And what that looked like was that we set up some hubs of places where people could drop off donations. We got ourselves together and set up a Venmo so people could send money to buy supplies. We started sending people down the road to different locations. And this happened really organically through the relationships that we had, but also through seeking out more connections with people that we knew and we had heard about things from friends or loved ones that were able to share with us, hey, this is something that I heard about. Can you reach out and see what's going on? And so it kind of looked like that for the first like week or so. And then people kept saying, well, who are you? Who's doing this? And at that point, it wasn't like an official thing, but we came together and we said, let's do this. Let's try to like really build something here. And so that's when we decided Holler to Holler is going to be a thing. And we are going to keep doing this and really commit to this work in a longer term way. And what that also meant was just sort of like trying to get more consistent conversations going, and really focusing again on that relationship aspect of disaster relief and recovery, connecting with a lot of the people that I actually have seen on this call and in other groups that have been doing this work for longer than we have, and just really learning and listening from them, and being on a crash course of what that looked like. And it was really nonstop for a while. The needs were immense, as so many of you know. And so we continued to just gather what we could. We were able to secure a generous space that was given to us as a like warehouse use for free at the time. And it really made all the difference in being able to bring more materials in and get them down the road as well. We were able to collaborate with places like the Pulaski Free Store and some churches over in Giles County. And they were really instrumental in just being there immediately to help people who were displaced, getting them food, getting them shelter, getting them clothing. And it was a really remarkable, if not overwhelming, thing to see the way that people just instinctively knew what to do, and to see the power of mutual aid in action. And to be able to be in community at a moment that was so heartbreaking and so devastating, and really made us have to take stock of what's coming and what we need to be prepared for, and what these disasters are starting to look like and the impacts that they're going to have. So basically, when we were progressing from that stage of looking forward into longer term recovery, we continued to send supplies and send people to do muck work, although in our beginning stages, we really didn't have the numbers of people to send like large groups. So it was about helping and supporting in ways that we could, boosting messages and trying to like keep Helene recovery on people's minds. And once that phase kind of ended for us, we shifted into trying to get our funds to places that had just a bigger haul in terms of the long-term recovery work. And so most of it went to Western North Carolina. But pretty much no sooner, maybe 2 weeks after all our funds were sent out, there was some really catastrophic flooding again in southern West Virginia. And this was in February of this past year, or this current year. And so again, we mobilized and started sending out mucking crews consistently. And they've been continuing to go first 2-3 times a week, and now weekly, or maybe a little bit less. But the need in southern West Virginia was just so great. And again, many of you, I'm sure, are aware of just the disparities that already exist there and compounding issues. There's an ongoing water crisis that has been all but neglected by a lot of the powers that be that would be able to be helpful. It's not even really acknowledged in a lot of those political spaces. And so organizers on the ground have just been so tenacious and taught us a lot about what mutual aid looks like in that context, and helping take care of the people around them, and really try to get options that let them have safe access to drinking water, and also be prepared for things like the flooding that we're seeing more and more. So as far as just the wider context of moving forward, and some of the like challenges and hurdles of holler to holler, any of y'all that have done disaster relief know there's just like a high threshold of burnout. It's really taxing, it's really emotional, it's really physically demanding depending on the roles that you have. It takes a lot of your spirit, it takes a lot of your mind and your heart. And so I think a lot of what we've spent the last sort of year doing as well is asking, how does Holler to Holler continue to be a place that represents the things we want to see in a mutual aid space in this region and related to disaster relief, but also looking around at all of the other needs that we have. How do we bring people into the fold in a way that feels good to everyone? There's so many different roles that people have that they're already doing, and just let that steady sort of trust, the pace of trust, be a thing that guides us, and get more organized with coming together in person, have ways of celebrating together and recognizing all the work that's been done, and trying to like raise awareness about our ongoing projects. You know, some of the things that we've done, and I've got some slides here that are up here, but we could flick through. And some of that is the Helene recovery that we did. And some of that is more recent muck work that we've done in West Virginia. And so just trying to make sure that things stay on our socials and in conversation, attending, you know, online meetups, trying to meet people in person where we can, getting involved in chats on Signal with people, just really trying to stay in and connected, and helping other mutual aid groups thrive, and learning from each other just as much as possible. And kind of in conclusion, when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about, I was sort of reflecting on how for so many of us, this was not an expected path. A lot of the relationships that have formed Holler to Holler came out of environmental work that had been done in the region, and specifically the fight against the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which went on for a decade and carries on now with the Southgate extension and the compressor station. So we were really familiar with the heartbreak that comes with when we have felt neglected and discarded, and the impacts on our natural world and the things that we rely on to sustain our lives day to day. And so I think when we see natural disasters, the response is, well, of course, we have to do something, right? We understand that feeling so deeply and so viscerally. And while so many of us didn't see this as a role that we might take on, it's become a very natural course, kind of looking around and understanding the precarity of the time that we live in and the ways that we want to be able to show up for each other like we have been. And so if I could say anything about it, it's just sort of like, those moments when people are like, well, who are you? What are you? And I just wanted to keep saying, like, we're just us. It really feels that way. Like, we're just us and we're just trying to do something, and putting a name around it is helpful to get the word out. And mutually, it's happening in so many different ways in so many different spaces. And I'm super excited to hear from the other speakers about their experiences and what they've done and what they've seen. But yeah, I think I'll leave it there for now. But thank you so much again for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Laura. Just so folks know, this is an hour-and-a-half webinar, so we'll have time to engage with all our speakers at the end, but please share your questions in the chat as we're going along. We can often answer those or make sure that we get them in the queue to ask them out loud. Next, we're going to hear from Lauren Albrecht, who's joining us from Virginia. Lauren works with Lonesome Pine Mutual Aid and is a member of the Alliance for Appalachia and a number of other groups because she's just a busy person like that. So we're so excited you made time to join us today, Lauren, and I'd love to hear more about the work you've been up to and about your one of your supply runs.
Thank you. I just want to say, hey, William, I just want to say that was excellent what Laura spoke on. My goodness. I felt like she's my kin sister, and that's the beauty of this mutual aid. Somehow it brings out this family of man, is what I always call it. What I'd like to do, a lot of you guys have probably done disaster relief, but I just kind of wanted to bring you along on a one of our disaster runs. I did type it out. Uh, so I'll try to get to it. Getting involved in this work starts with a gut punch. Helene was a gut punch. It's what showed me that I really am an Appalachian in my heart and soul, despite my northern accent. I have 12 family members who live in Nashville. My mother grew up there during the Depression. So yeah, as soon as I saw, like the rest of the country, what happened there, I had to go. At first, we only had their local radio, Asheville's nonstop news and information, where to get water, food, search and rescue teams. It was very intense, as you all know. Eventually, when folks' internet service was getting up, I found Facebook groups. The best one I followed was Friends of Swannanoa. I studied it and the comments and learned a lot about who was doing the real work. Finding trustworthy contacts is crucial. That's a big word I've heard, and trust is crucial. I was so thankful to have the backing of the grassroots group, Lonesome Pine Mutual Aid. So that's who I'm here with, and I'm in far Southwest Virginia. I didn't say that. Lonesome Pine Mutual Aid, and also the Care Collective. And I said hello to William because he has helped bring supplies and has been a real godsend as well. So we have a hub, a little space, and started collecting items. We have the knowledge of folks who had helped in and personally experienced the 2022 Kentucky floods. With a lot of contradictory and sketchy info out there, I tuned into North Carolina Department of Trans, called Irwin, Tennessee's fire department to confirm that the main roads were passable. And we went the second week of October. A young friend from work, Katie, accompanied me. We packed the car to the max. They call us road squirrels. I had typed out 3 pages of verified contacts, contacting them directly beforehand, what their needs were, their hours of operation, the conditions of the road. There's so many issues. We knew it was serious and scary, but our heart was into it. Prepared to camp indoors, we stayed at my cousin, who still didn't have electricity or water, but thankfully it came on just as we arrived. Driving down Highway 26, our hearts stopped when we went through Irwin, Tennessee. Scene of some of the most immense devastation. That part of the highway, as y'all know, was just collapsed. You heard it before, but it's true. When you see it in real life, it really does something to you. Our first stop was beloved Asheville. Some of y'all probably heard of them. They've been working with the homeless for years before this. And it's a big operation. Trucks coming and going, giving, offloading, people picking up supplies. They were very organized. We came in just my Subaru, but they were very appreciative. We told them we were trying to make real live contacts for future runs. It was a beautiful thing to be a part of. It's like everyone knew what to do. Laura referred to that, why we were there. And this was the deepest part of the whole work that affected me and continues to. No politics, just raw human response to need. Yes, Subaru. Yes. Then we went to Swan and Noah. We heard World Central Kitchen was there, and they, as we all probably know, they're amazing people. Somehow they know just where the worst hit places are all over the world. And as we drove through town, you could see every church and business was set up for disaster relief. I'd never seen anything like it before. Water, diapers, food. We went and found the local fire department. And spoke to one of the firemen, and he was overwhelmed and apologetic. He said they were running ATVs, rescuing people, taking food to folks when they can, but they weren't running a distribution site. And we just said, "You're doing so much. We're just trying to find where we could help." It was Katie who spotted the World Central Kitchen sign on a huge water truck. That picture will show up in a minute. We went to speak to one serving food, Chris of Blunt Pretzels. Blunt Pretzels is a very cool place down there. It turns out they work with World Central Kitchen. They supply them with good fresh food. And he said he'd been there since the storm, 2 weeks, morning and night. And this is what really got me. He told us that there was a little low-income village pointed down the road that was wiped out from the storm. Yep, that's Swananoa. That was Beacon Village. You should look it up. Beacon Village. It had gotten totally wiped out. He said they had nothing. So they set up there and many others set up. We gave them what we had left of supplies and some cash, and he seemed surprised and really grateful, though it felt so meager to us. I said, this seems like ground zero. And he said, this is ground zero. It was like you wanted to cry, but you just can't in the middle of it all. There's just too much to do. On return trips, we helped out in their kitchen. It was such a privilege. Yeah, later, there you go. World Central Kitchen, Blunt Pretzels. It was just beautiful. And right down that street was the Beacon Village. We found out that Swananoa really was ground zero. The river normally runs shy of 2 feet, but that day it crested to nearly 30 feet and a mile wide. So it was like a tsunami just blew through. Yep. So now when I drive over these quaint Appalachian creeks and rivers, I guess you call it PTSD, but I just imagine it being 30 feet and a mile wide. Then we headed down to River Road. We drove in stunned silence, only occasionally gasping, "Dear Lord, oh my God." It hit like a ton of bricks. It was like a war zone. What we saw, me and Katie, will never leave us. We saw people digging through the rubble of what was their house. Those roads run right along the Swananoa River. It was just hard to get across. The next day we went up to Burnsville, hearing they were hit real hard, with no supplies left, but had some cash to offer. We ran across the West Yancey Volunteer Fire Department. That's what this is. It was an amazing operation there. The man there helping to organize had a huge site. He was surprisingly easy to talk to despite the unbelievable responsibility he was overseeing. He showed us a map on the wall and pointed out neighboring counties where fire departments were just wiped out and said that they are taking on that whole region. This being the only firehouse that stood. He said they were doing rescues with ATVs, bringing food, water, medicine to folks, helicopters if necessary. I looked around inside the firehouse. The place was set up like a grocery store with organized aisles of food, toilet paper, water, over-the-counter meds, all kinds of stuff. Then it occurred to me these fire trucks, huge ladder trucks, couldn't possibly get out. That might be the next picture. He said there's no point in taking the trucks. That was on the way to Yancey. He said it was absolutely not safe for those heavy trucks to get out on the compromised roads. That blew me away. The only thing I had left to offer was some instant coffee and powder creamer. I heard folks really wanted that, and it seemed almost silly in the midst of everything. But he pointed me to the chef at the kitchen, cool guy. He accepted it and thanked me and said, it's the smallest things that make the biggest difference. Coffee is never silly. You're right. Another place we went, Spruce Pine, far up on a mountain, a woman had set up tents all over her yard with supplies. Yeah, that was Beacon Village, by the way. Heart hurt. She became the distribution site for those who were unable to get out. There were very, very amazing stories when you listen to the people and they want to share their stories. Heartbreaking, full of resilience, gratitude, and hope. There's Katie and Tori, the young friends I brought down. That's Blunt Pretzel, and they helped serve. It's really cool. We did 6 more disaster reliefs in Western North Carolina. By then we learned the needs better, purchased mops, mildew buckets. Doing runs in the winter felt especially urgent as people were still unhoused in frigid temperatures. We purchased heaters, brought gift cards for them to purchase propane. Yeah, that's Yancey. That one blew, you have no idea, that is a huge water tank that knocked over on its side. And then we went, yes, the February floods in Hurley, Welsh, West Virginia. Wow. And the tornado near London, always working with groups, whether funding, helping, loading, or accompanying each other down. Definitely a group effort. Definitely a group effort. When I went to Kentucky, I found good contacts through another big mutual aid group. I cannot emphasize enough how important these groups are. As soon as a disaster hits, the text group is buzzing, and the contacts are priceless. Because how do you wander into a tornado place and you got money in your pocket, but who do you connect with to help? People are desperate, and you need trustworthy folks. The site here blew my mind. I'd never seen tornado destruction up front like this before. A whole trailer park just erased. Again, the intensely beautiful, albeit sad thing about it was the human connection. The people doing distribution, welcoming you like a long-lost sister. The joy in the moment of having them feeling the support seemed to override the trauma. The coordinator couldn't believe I came from Virginia. Imagine her surprise when I pulled out boxes of blankets from Utah. Yeah, that's the beauty of mutual aid. After Helene, people from all over the country donated lots of supplies to Asheville, a beloved town. As the months passed, needs changed, and some of the distribution sites closed. They sent their excess along to other aid groups. That's where William comes in. He loaded up his trailers and brought up the stuff. Thus, the blankets from Utah via Western North Carolina. You did it, Lindsay, right on. When I was in Hurley after the flood, folks I met in Western North Carolina showed up. A couple that were originally from Texas. So to wrap it up, the things that stuck with me and prep for the inevitable, yeah, there's William. The inevitable next one. Do homework, listen to those who traveled the roads, bring physical mats. There's Stacy. That's my Subaru. Make actual contacts. When you go back, double check their needs because these things change frequently. But above all, remember, it's the smallest things that make the biggest difference. And there I shall end. I hope I didn't overdo my time. And that's my brother, by the way, Fire Chief Doug Albrecht. Taught me a lot about this disaster relief.
That was such a gift, Lauren. So thank you. And if you want to meet Lauren and William and some of the other folks, there's an event coming up October 24th through 26th, which I do believe is currently at a wait list, but I'll re-up that event in the chat of folks getting together in person to talk about some of these incredibly important issues. But thank you so much for the work that you do and for putting it together into such a beautiful story and sharing that with us. It's a real gift.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so Zev will continue telling some of the stories from North Carolina and the wonderful work y'all doing down there. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it was crazy seeing some of those pictures, Lauren, because I live right down the road from Swannanoa, North Carolina, in a place called Earth Haven Eco Village. And it's like a 330-acre off-grid intentional community that's been here 30 years. And we've been developing mutual aid and cooperative living and kind of land-based systems for a long time here. And I grew up in Western North Carolina. Wow, that yellow is so gloriously bright. Wake up. And it's raining here, so I needed the yellow to keep my serotonin balanced. I grew up over in Silva, North Carolina, which is West North Carolina, and in a 4-acre patch of kudzu. And that was the land that my family could afford when we moved here when I was 2. And so I grew up knowing kudzu. And by the way, if anyone is interested in learning more about kudzu, we started a whole nonprofit around that called Kudzu Culture, around eating kudzu and using it for medicine and for fodder for animals and for erosion control and ecological restoration and keeping it in check by harvesting it. So check out Kudzu Culture if you want to learn more about that. On a side note, and I am coming to mutual aid and cooperative organizing through a background in agroecology and permaculture and sustainable agriculture. I worked for many years as an educator and living that way and consulting with landowners around the Southeast to kind of develop sustainable human settlements or regenerative human settlements. And through about 12 years of that work, I came to see that the real limiting factors, I think, on humans living regeneratively on the earth are social and cultural and relational and economic. That because people don't have land access or don't have the support systems that we need in our lives to actually take care of long-term regenerative land systems, that we can't really do any of that stuff well while we have this system of extreme inequity and where the impacts of things like disasters are disproportionately landing on low wealth people and marginalized people. And so I got into around 2016, I started learning more about the history of mutual aid organizing in the United States, which is our old, incredible history. Probably a lot of y'all know about it, but and around the world and around cooperative movements, especially land-based peasant movements in Western Europe and in Central America and in the US. And I started to refocus on how do we develop more collective power to actually change some of the land ownership structures, change who controls wealth, change who has access to different kinds of resource and knowledge, allow people to get out of survival mode so that we can dream together about what kinds of economic and cultural systems and what kinds of life we want, and then actually have the resources to do that. And so that's what led to founding Cooperate WNC in 2018, 2019. And in terms of how this relates to disaster work explicitly, I really like this framing from Naomi Klein, which probably a lot of you are familiar with, of disaster capitalism, right? Disaster capitalism is when a disaster hits, like Hurricane Katrina. She wrote the book about Hurricane Katrina, and in New Orleans after the hurricane, what happened? People with wealth managed to buy up most of the real estate and managed to use the disaster as a kind of bone reset that allowed them to consolidate even more wealth and resources and change the character of New Orleans and the surrounding area. Disaster cooperativism is what I'm working on, what we're working on, which is saying, what would it take for us to collectively have the capacities in place so that when disasters hit, yes, we have immediate response, immediate mutual aid, and also coordinating with government and other people who are working on it, and international NGOs to respond to disasters, but also how can we use the energy, catch and store the energy, the transformational energy of disasters to change the underlying systems that made it so that low wealth people get disproportionately killed and their houses destroyed and left without jobs, and all of the impacts from disasters to change those underlying systems. So that's a kind of disaster cooperativism, a blanket term for creating the capacities, the long-term cooperative institutions, practices, culture, trust. I really like the emphasis on trust making that I'm hearing in this group and the speakers so far. And that's exactly what we work from, is understanding how does trust grow. And I think that trust kind of grows like topsoil, and we'll talk more about it kind of explicitly, how we try to do that in our network. It's like topsoil, it can wash away really quickly. Trust can be destroyed, and then it takes time to regrow. And there's some ways of doing that. So yeah, with Cooperate WNC, we focus on, we're a regional network. So we're attempting to work at a regional scale. That's 22 counties of Western North Carolina. It's a big area. It's almost the size of the state of Massachusetts. We've actually got mostly active people in about 15 of those counties right now. So that's like a long-term aspirational project, the 22 counties. And we're trying to link together different local grassroots mutual aid groups in a network where people can share resources and share knowledge and develop those trusting relationships between each other, so that there can be this flow. When one little group doesn't have what it needs, it knows who to reach out to ask for what it needs. And then this is developing the long-term trust that can allow us to do bigger kind of long-term cooperative institution making, so that there's this flow back and forth between grassroots mutual aid activity, which a lot of people here are talking about today, and then long-term cooperative institution making. Cooperative institutions, examples of that are like savings and loans pools, which is something that we work with people in communities to start. It's where a group of 15 or 20 people get together and pool their savings, and then have a shared account that they can make 0% interest loans to each other to put the down payment on the mortgage for a house, or to start a farm business, or to deal with a financial emergency in their family. So it's a way of getting loans and financing access away from just banks and into the hands of our communities. Other examples of cooperative institutions are things like worker cooperatives, which a lot of people here are probably familiar with, food cooperatives, housing co-ops. I live in a housing co-op at Earth Haven. Healthcare co-ops, there's various types of cooperative healthcare where people at different levels of formality band together to share resources and provide healthcare for people who need it, whether or not they can afford it. So these are cooperative institutions, things that take longer term organizing, more resources, more trust in a lot of ways, more partnership making than just short-term grassroots mutual aid organizing. But then the long-term institutions provide the structure and topsoil to support the short-term mutual aid groups or the more grassroots people in doing what they're doing better, because they can access what they need more. So there's this kind of play back and forth between those, and we work in that play a lot. We are a 501c3, Cooperate WNC is. We made that choice in 2018 so that we could serve the function of bringing in money to get it to grassroots projects. And that's a big role that we played in the response to Helene, is acting as a fiscal sponsor. We started hearing in the days and weeks after the storm that grassroots mutual aid groups wanted to keep taking donations, but they were concerned about the impact on their personal finances, because they were just like receiving donations to their personal Venmo and PayPal accounts and stuff, and then having to be tax liable for that. So we hopped in to become a fiscal sponsor for unincorporated mutual aid groups. That was a big need that we heard about. And in general, that's how we try to work. I've heard some people already in here, Lauren and Laura, were talking about kind of needs-based work, listening to the community about what's needed. That's the biggest takeaway I would offer. It's kind of the heartbeat of what we're doing is figuring out how to listen well and how to do sense making, collective sense making of like really what's most important right now. What are the real needs? What are the strengths and capacities present in our community? Which ones are missing? And how can we go find those outside our communities and bring them in? So that needs-based organizing is a major principle. One of the things that we do a lot in order to learn about those needs is community dialogues, where we create kind of sets of interview questions, and then we train people in their own communities, not outsiders, but members of a local little watershed, to go talk to other folks in their watershed, ask really good questions, ask follow-up questions, ask questions like what's working really well already, not just what are the problems, what's working really well already, as well as what isn't here, what do we need, what are we missing, where do you see all this going, you know, asking people in a community like that. And you have, you know, ask 15 people these questions, you start to hear some themes and start to develop a sense of, okay, this is what's here, this is what we need, this is what's next. And then you have a place to act on whatever the need is. Maybe the need is for land access or for food to a certain area or for some type of healthcare access. Then that's coming out of an actual sense on the ground of what people are saying they need, rather than just like a nonprofit or do-gooder broadcasting our own thinking about what is needed. So we do a lot of this asset-based community development as a modality that some of y'all have probably heard of or done, which is a type of community interview process you can read more about online, based in the ABCD Institute in Chicago, and a history of community organizing coming out of the civil rights movement. We do a lot of that kind of conversation making and then convening small groups based around the themes that come out of that. And then those groups turn into action planning groups. So it's this emergent way of organizing that comes from insights from talking to folks. And then another big thing that came out of the storm for us, we were already doing, you know, a big principle, again, is another principle I'll say is to work from our strengths, work from where we're at. That's where we have the most leverage and power, is working where we're actually at, what we're already doing. We already have skill in, we already know the limitations of. So we had been doing bulk purchasing, cooperative bulk purchasing of food and farming supplies for a lot of people in our network are farmers. We already had developed a set of rural hubs throughout Western North Carolina. Like some of them are some person's barn or a business or a person's house that's a distribution hub. And we kind of have it figured out how to get a big shipment into a central warehouse in Asheville and then distribute things to the rural hubs, and then people come and pick them up at the rural hubs. So we use that hub system to get food and farming supplies out in the weeks and months after the hurricane. And that's now strengthened our trust and our relationships with a lot of those people, because we're able to get them things that they actually needed. And then another thing is that I'm going to take another just minute to finish up thoughts here. I just hit the 10 minutes. Another thing is that we started to observe that there were a lot of people stepping up as leaders and organizers in their communities through the storm, and they were demonstrating that their communities trusted them. And they're demonstrating that because people would show up at the work parties they organized. People would donate money to the links they put up. So it was kind of like they were getting votes of confidence from their communities. And so we said, oh, this is a really good indicator to see the underlying kind of relationship map of who's working together, who's got established trust in these small communities. So we approached those folks and invited them to this thing that we're doing called the Kinship Program, which is a fellowship. It's a mutual aid fellowship program of community organizers from around Western North Carolina, who we now have in a peer support group, and they're learning together and doing experiments together and managing a participatory mutual aid fund together that we've raised money for, getting support on work projects back in their home environments and their hubs. They're now acting as hubs for the bulk purchasing. So kind of fitting things all together like that. And the last couple of things I'll just bullet point that could be for future questions or discussion if people want to follow up is we're working so at the kind of confluence of land access. It's a huge issue in Western North Carolina that was really highlighted by the storm. Also with conflict systems, we heard through one of our listening projects that people experiencing conflict in their groups was actually the biggest barrier to successful long-term cooperative organizing, even more so than money. So we're now helping people to develop conflict systems in a group where they plan out ahead of time how they're going to deal with different conflicts in a way that actually works with people's nervous systems and brings them together and creates trust rather than breaking them apart. Um, and then yeah, focusing on listening, training people how to listen and emerge with what community organizing is next based on the needs. And with that, I will stop. Thanks for hearing me.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you for all that fantastic work you're doing. There's a request in the chat to learn more about the conflict resolution systems. And I will say we're doing a facilitation conversation next month, and we had run a survey in advance about what folks might want to chat about, and conflict resolution was one of the top things that folks mentioned. So it's definitely an important question.
Oh, let's talk more about that.
Yeah, let's do it. But first, I am so excited that Polly was able to join us from the Ohio Valley Mutual Aid Organization. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Polly, because I want to learn more about your work.
Okay. Hi, hello. Thanks for having me. I got some slides to keep myself on track, but yeah, hi, I'm Polly. I'm with Ohio Valley Mutual Aid. Confusingly, we are in Wheeling, West Virginia, not really Ohio, but close enough. We're right over the river, and I have lived here since March, so I'm super new, but I'm originally from very northern Virginia, so familiar with Appalachia. But yeah, so talking about Ohio Valley Mutual Aid and kind of what we do, getting a little nitty gritty. So if you could hop to the next slide, that'd be perfect. Okay, so I know we're talking kind of big disaster relief here, but I think a lot of our ethos is kind of about everyday disasters. And like within capitalism, like I don't need to tell you guys, like there's just such a number of everyday disasters that we encounter. So a lot of what we do is kind of both addressing those and kind of trying to mitigate them before they happen. So some of the programming that we do within our community kitchen. So I was actually there last night. We get a group of 15 to 20 people, cook meals together. I now have meals for the next 3 to 4 dinners. Just don't have to think about it. Saves money, saves time, but also it kind of is the mutual part of mutual aid. Like a lot of times we give a lot and we forget that like mutual goes back and forth. So even the organizers do need kind of that replenishment. And so that's been a really lovely way to work on that. We also offer reproductive resources, gender affirming closets and clothing swaps, and also general financial assistance. So this is kind of like my understanding of what mutual aid was before I got started. It's like your community member needs to make rent or like a car payment, or they need to stop their utilities from getting shut off. And I'm hopeful that before I end talking, we will have a new mutual aid request up on our Instagram from a community member that needs help with their mortgage. And if you would be interested to see kind of our model of that, I can actually drop an active campaign. But yeah, so all of these we kind of do like on a day-to-day basis, and that is our everyday disaster relief. But if you can pop over to the next slide, I came to Wheeling, hooked up with Ohio Valley Mutual Aid, met some great friends almost immediately, went to 2 meetings, decided this is great. At Pride, we set up a gender affirming closet. You can see that tent right there. I was huddled under this tent in downtown Wheeling when the rain started. We got trapped under there. Our clothes got really wet. It wasn't terrible downtown, but I popped that tent down at 10 o'clock with some good friends and went home, didn't think anything of it. Woke up the next morning from a text from another mutual aid member. And by 9 the next morning, so like less than 12 hours later, that tent went from a gender affirming closet to a disaster relief tent. We had no idea what we were doing, but we had a couple folks there, and I was just looking back at my notes. The very first day we sent 16 teams to local businesses and homes, teams of 3 to 6 volunteers. This was all organic. We just shot it out on social media that we were here. We were inundated with supplies. We eventually grew. We moved to the Toy and Train Museum, which was nearby, as our systems got better. And what we did was we really offered supply pickups and muck out operations. So we didn't have money, we didn't have a ton of infrastructure, but we knew we could get bodies. And so we got bodies. In the first week, I think we had over 100 volunteers, maybe 120. I can't remember the exact numbers, but they would show up. We had a Google form. We were connecting homeowners with people willing to get into 6 inches of mud in a basement and just start digging. We also did the tetanus shot clinic with Project Hope and Health Department. And so we did that for several weeks. And then what kind of grew into that is, as we kind of became a hub within this community response, people started giving us money. They drive up to the 28th Train Museum and just hand us $100 bill. And we were like, what do we do with this? We have so many supplies, we're turning people away. And it just kind of kept rolling and rolling. And we decided to do a direct financial assistance lottery. And that is in the running right now. So if you could go to the next slide, I think it's the right one. Yes. So I can't play the video, but that's okay. It's Mr. Rogers with some good overlays. But so yeah, we did the math, the bad math, don't quote me on any of this, that we ended up hitting close to 140 homes and businesses. 800 plus volunteers came through our lines. We had probably 15 to 20 core organizers, again, like 100% volunteer staffed and funded. And then in the end, we did a little over $37,000 in direct cash assistance. I actually have been on my phone this whole time getting calls from people who are trying to confirm their information. But yeah, so by Saturday, we will have handed out fully $37,000 to impacted flood folks. And most importantly, which I think is on the next slide, is no barriers. Yes, no barriers, no stipulations. So we asked people to submit a couple questions. We give them a call, ask them if it was their primary home, and that's it. They needed to be an owner or a renter. That was their primary home affected by the flood. That's all we ask. We don't care what you use it for. We don't care how many, we don't even need to look at your ID because we've already built relationships with these folks. So it's a very organic process that comes out of trusting our community to know what's best. So I think quickly, the lessons we learned is do one thing and do it well. So especially being so small, there are about a million things we could do. We were like, well, we could do water, we could cook for people, we could do a lot of things, but we figured muck outs. We got bodies, we got people willing to go out, they can start digging. And that's what we did. So we did cleaning supplies and we did muck outs. There was no food, no nothing. We didn't accept clothes. We did one thing well. Make barriers for aid and volunteers as low as possible. I think this was another big thing. We had folks coming from other spots that were like, well, we didn't really know. We got to this big place, we didn't know what to do. And we're like, well, we do this one thing. If you're interested, we will slot you in. So not only giving aid, but getting aid, making sure that it's really accessible. There are plenty of organizations gatekeeping. Mutual aid groups don't need to be. Real action leads to real community, right? Again, we had people defending us that were upset at all the little leftists coming into their community. They're like, no, they helped us. They didn't ask about our politics. So again, it's just that trust building and it's really beautiful. And I think that's what we've learned. And I believe I have one more slide that some advice for replicating, because we woke up maybe hungover from Pride, perhaps, and dove into work that we really did not anticipate. And we learned a lot. We grew really quickly. I think selfishly, I think we did a great job. But I think we need to be talking, and none of this is particularly brilliant. I realize this is pretty obvious, but talk to orgs that do the work before the next disaster, and talk to organizations that you admire, right? Ohio Valley Mutual Aid is not going to be the Red Cross for any number of reasons. So looking to those mutual aid groups that you really admire and want to replicate, and learn their systems. I also think gathering your community and surveying strengths is really important. Like, I cannot physically muck out, but I created the entire back end of how homeowners applied and how we connected volunteers. And I was doing mass text and phone calls and volunteer lead coordination. I can do that. Somebody else that just wanted to organize supplies and not talk to anyone was like the master of keeping a supply spreadsheet. So whatever skill you have, there is a place for you. And again, just because I am a data nerd and a spreadsheet nerd, I think building back-end scaffolding to support that front-facing work is really important. And we learned that very quickly, that like you can send people out, but without back-end organization, it becomes overwhelming. The burnout comes quicker because you feel really frazzled. The more back-end smoothing and organizing you have can really make things easier and not feel quite as overwhelming, even though of course it is. So yeah, I just encourage you to make neighbors helping neighbors an action, not a slogan. And oh, I don't know if you can hear that, but my time is up. And yeah, I think if there's anything you'd like to talk about with me now or later, we're always happy to chat and kind of share what we learned, our tactics, and even like the mechanisms we use to kind of scale up our volunteers. Be to share. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And Liam, I think we can be done spotlighting. We'll just keep a big group for this conversation. I know a lot of folks are off camera, which is totally fine. But yeah, we'll just move into conversation. Thank you so much, Polly, and thank you for right there at the end for highlighting the different types of skills that folks can bring into this work, because there are, there are so many skills, and I think so many folks feel helpless because they can't muck out a basement for physical reasons, or they can't donate large amounts of money. But one, small amounts of money are just fine, and two, there are just thousands of ways to participate. So I'm really happy that you highlighted that in your remarks, among everything else. So wow, what powerful stories that we heard today, and what powerful work. So I just want to take a minute to maybe highlight something that Lauren said, which is that PTSD and that grief she feels now when she drives along the hollers and looks at the creeks and pictures them 30 feet high these days. And just to say that the things that have been happening to our region with the increase of flooding, it is unprecedented, and it is just such a weight to carry. So I just want to acknowledge that, and what that might have brought up for folks as we're having these conversations and remembering these times. But as I always say, we sort of want to honor the trauma and the hard times by doing good work together. So I'm going to move into that good work phase of the conversation. I didn't see a lot of questions in the chat. If you all had specific questions in the chat and I missed them, please re-up those in the chat so that I can make sure that we get to those. But one of my favorite questions to ask speakers is this one, which is, what's a lesson that you learned along the way, maybe the hard way, that you wish you'd known at the start? And I might kind of go in order and ask our speakers to answer that question, maybe starting with Laura.
Oh, I'm on the spot.
Sorry.
That's okay.
You're probably so relaxed. You went first, you got it over with.
Hard part's over. I think for me, and like just having had many conversations with the group, for us, because we're such a young group in terms of coming together, it's just how do we make this sustainable? And in the aftermath of the first couple months of Helene, there was like a core group of us doing a lot of the back end, and we were all just in tatters. So it was this question of how do we keep doing this and not wring ourselves out so that we can't keep doing it. And I think that's a question in so many different ways in our lives, in different spaces, but particularly in organizing spaces. I think there is a tendency to just pour yourself out because you see the great need. There's no lack of needs anywhere at any point, but particularly in a disaster scenario. And so understanding that it's not just important, it's necessary that you find ways of taking care of yourself and of holding each other up when you see someone else struggling too. Like that is such a core tenet to me of mutual aid as well, of being in a space that doesn't have to replicate the grind and the sort of demand. Like you can say, hey, I need support on this, and have people come in and see you and hear you and really validate you in that way. There's so many other things that we learned the hard way, but I think that's like one of the really important ones that has just stuck with me.
Thank you. Lauren, do you have an answer for us? You can pass. I didn't let Laura pass, but you can pass. You're on mute if you do have an answer, Lauren. I'll give you a minute.
Okay. Well, just a couple things, not necessarily the hard way, but for example, I mean, it was kind of like, oh, good thing I brought some cash when I first went down to Western North Carolina, because even getting gas, at that time, the electric was all screwed up, right? So that was just a little thing. And a little on those lines, one thing I feel like, when I would follow the face group, what everybody else was doing, it's easy to compare myself and ourselves. And so all these people were bringing these big trucks loaded with, buddy heaters during the winter. Um, but somehow the idea came to us, we started communicating about getting gift cards. And I couldn't haul a bunch of buddy heaters, but we got gift cards. So that way the people had the choice to get gas, propane, kerosene, or groceries. And it kept that money in their community. And that was just a good thing we kind of learned, but it started off with, oh, gee, I guess I'm not that great bringing what they need, right? So, um, but I do remember when I was up in Kentucky meeting one of a real good mutual aid lady. At the moment I forget her name, but she's been doing this for a long time, and I could tell she was really burned out. And we actually got to meet rather than just be on a text. She's from Kentucky. And I said, why don't we go get a bite to eat? And we just went to this Mexican restaurant, sat down, and I could just feel her. So it's along the lines of making sure that we support each other too. That, like recognizing each other when we're getting burned out and trying to be supportive. So I'll leave it at that. And we had a good conversation, and she was saying, I can't keep mucking. And we started, we got to find other younger folks. She was even older than me. I'm 65. And yeah, you need to get in other people to help do some of the hard work.
Thank you, Lauren. And I see folks connecting in the chat, so I want to take a minute, and then Zeb, you're next. But but you get an extra minute. And so I see folks connecting in the chat who are maybe wanting to build something like this where you live. And so I encourage folks, if that might be you, please share who you are and where you are, and maybe you can make a connection. And then also, if you're aware of mutual aid groups that haven't been mentioned, we'd love to see them shouted out in the chat. So please share those as well. So Zeb, what is something that you've learned along the way you might save someone else the trouble of learning the hard way?
Yeah, well, I was really appreciating where Lauren was going, because I'll splice right onto that yarn. And I think about this a lot, actually, because we have this kinship program that I mentioned, which is the fellowship program for mutual aid organizers. And it's so tempting to overextend and to try to do everything at once, because there's so much need and so much tattered fragments and so much suffering and broken systems all around us. And what I've discovered in my own life and through working with a lot of people who are kind of at various stages of community organizing in their journey is, if we can take an honest assessment of where my own life is at, what support systems do I have, what relationships of trust do I have, what skill sets do I have and don't I have, how much capacity do I actually have, what resources are available, and then kind of get my own ship a little tighter then that's an integral place to reach out and offer support from. And if I don't do that work first, and I try to reach out and offer support to a wider community or network, then I end up collapsing, burning out at key moments, at the most crucial moments when people are trying to count on me. So we do a lot of things in our kinship cohort, like relationship mapping, where people draw out what are their relationships and what kinds of support do they have. We have folks do a community trust self-assessment where they talk about and do journaling about how much do people trust me in my community, in what ways do people trust me, and in what ways don't people trust me, where's the repair that I might need to do in order to be respected and welcomed as an organizer or as a leader more. We have people go and then ask other folks in their community for feedback around that so that they're getting others' perspective on that, right? We have them do a capacity assessment where they look at what's my actual capacity, what support systems do I have? Do I have financial backing if I have some financial emergency in my life? What resources do I have? Are there any challenges I can foresee coming up? So kind of like getting really honest and explicit about what my life is made of, developing more collective systems of mutual support in my own life, and then skilling up through that to then determine what the next needs-based actions are in a wider community circle that are actually sustainable. And then you can cycle that back. And as we learn, we can get a little more ambitious kind of as we learn and succeed and repair and stuff. So it's starting at that home front, you know, in my own life and with that honesty.
I love that. And I want to, how many of the speakers have said, self-care, mutual aid going in both directions is such a key part of the work. And, in my work as well, I think burnout is such a big part of the policy and advocacy space. And one thing I think I learned the hard way about, just to kind of lift up, is that having you for 6 months at 150 hours a week is less valuable than having you for 10 years at 5 hours a week, right? And so sometimes giving a little, for longer in a way that doesn't harm is absolutely the right thing to do. And I think it's just important to keep saying that to each other, because the pressure is so high, and it's always urgent. But again, if things, I've been doing this for 20 years, and so it's been urgent for 20 years, which is difficult to keep up, right? On my own work anyway, which is different than y'all's. But anyway, so Matthew has a fantastic question, which probably already started to answer in the chat, but I want to shout this out for our other speakers. Or honestly, if I know there's so many experts on this call, so at this point, if folks have a really strong answer or good learning, please share in the chat or come off mute and share. But after the initial wave of disaster response, there's a very difficult period when the needs are getting worse, but the attention and visibility of the need is disappearing. Or the sort of brutal reality of after the disaster in Wheeling, there was the disaster in Texas, and there just was this I don't even know how to articulate this, but you could see that the national attention and the ability to get larger donations from out of the region went away because of this other disaster. Now, obviously, that's the world, right? That's the new reality. But yeah, I'd love to hear folks think about that, because as I said in my opening remarks, we still have folks in Western North Carolina and even in Kentucky from the 2022 floods who are still facing vulnerable housing situations because of that initial floods. So yeah, anybody have any thoughts about those dynamics and ways that y'all have kind of kept up the energy and past the immediate disaster days?
I mean, I'll kind of echo what I put in the chat, but we're like a little scrappy group, so I think it's a little different from larger organizations, but like a lot of us are friends. We're like, we could also like have fun. And so once the initial adrenaline is gone, you have to find another way to reinvigorate people, and it's not like threatening them or telling them tragic stories again. It's kind of like coming together and re-energizing people. So like some of what we did is like our superstar volunteers, we like took them out for lunch, and like because a lot of them are like kind of older folks that don't have much to do and they like being around young people. And we would have live music events at a friend's house and just offer all the volunteers to come over. We had some artist friends who just a couple weeks ago had a big art fundraising event. So like a new fresh round of funding coming through for us. So I think there's finding the joy, because again, I think we in disaster relief and thinking about the climate and mutual aid and dealing with capitalism, it's all very dark. So infusing that sense of joy makes people like, oh, I'm energized to go back on. And it doesn't always help, but we found that like core group of people do keep coming back, especially like once we start building those relationships just beyond the emergency, right? This is a real relationship. It's not forged only in like terror and adrenaline. This is long term, and it can be delightful as well. And that gets folks going out. We have somebody going to haul debris out of a house tomorrow. We have 6 folks that we just texted, and we're going to send them with a gift card for some groceries, and it's a smaller scale, but you just keep going. So that's kind of my thoughts. Fun.
I love that. And I think we were just talking about it on a call last week, but the importance of finding joy throughout all the history of human work for a better world is the joy. That's the why we do it. Jason, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, this is Jason speaking. I work with Climate Reality. I'm out of Pittsburgh and pet chem organizer for the Ohio River Valley. Something that I work closely with, all my work is disability centered, so that's what I'm always thinking about, especially when it comes to um, disaster prep and mutual aid. And something really, what you said earlier is when like the money dries up, something for the disability community. Like I have stats in front of me here. The majority of disabled people, this is from the census, who are um, evacuated during a disaster are never able to return home. And some of the other statistics that are pretty scary. Let me see if I can find it again. 70% of deaf people who were evacuated reporting living in unsanitary conditions a month after disaster, compared to just 7% of people with good hearing. And if you look at other disabilities, like looking at 74% of evacuees who are unable to walk reported experienced a lack of food, compared to just 9% of people who can walk. So something that we've really been trying to do in our work is integrate disability justice pretty much into everything we do. I help organize with an organization called the People Over Petro Coalition, and that's what we're currently doing. We work with a disability organization called the People's Hub. We did a training, and now we're working with them to make sure that all of our movement work is disability centered. In the way I'm disabled myself. In the way I look like it is within the climate movement, people with disabilities have always kind of been forgotten and left out. But we're the most impacted when disaster happens. We intersect with all the other marginalized groups, and but we offer something unique as well. It's a group of people that largely a lot of them have spent their lives adapting to a world that wasn't built for them. So that's kind of like why would you not want that knowledge and wisdom when we're trying to adapt to a world that we're looking at now? Um, so that's why, I always try to bring disability justice to all the work we do. And I always say, like, if you're looking at out in building a world for the disabled community, that's going to catch everybody else within that. Um, and I always say, if you're just thinking about something like the curb cut effect, which is basically the curb cutout that was built for people with wheelchairs, but that works great for mothers with strollers, people, just anybody walking. So just trying to find that effect too for the climate movement, so we can really protect everybody. But just thinking about that, and I'm happy to discuss this more with anybody. So I'll leave my information in the chat. So yeah, please reach out if you're interested about talking about this subject. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's wonderful. It's really helpful. And the audience was full of gratitude if you didn't see all the hearts flying by. Laura, I saw your hand was up.
Yeah, there have already been so many awesome things shared, I feel like, in response to the question, which I also really appreciate. When I read that question, my first thought was that a thing I was reflecting on during Helene was how much attention Asheville was able to get, and that other regions were not, and communities outside of Asheville were not, even though they were hit even harder. And so I think that disproportionate attention onto places with money and figureheads and cultural capacity and sort of like an importance in the way of capitalism, right, often get the most sort of oomph behind a disaster. We saw how the fires in LA were like on all of our screens for weeks and weeks. And also just the kind of brutal nature of the media cycle being like, you might get a couple weeks, maybe a little longer if it's a really bad thing. But for me, when I think about like, how do I keep sharing stories? Because my other work is photographer and filmmaker. So I'm always thinking about how do we talk about things and share things. But if we don't start from a place of like trying to convince people that it's worth talking about, that we know that it's worth continuing to share and that it's a long-term effort, no matter what the issue is. And the fact that, you know, like in February, no one was really talking about the floods in McDowell or in Southern West Virginia. And that's just kind of the norm there. And so I can't say that I think about how to get attention so much as just, what do we need to be doing all the time? And maybe it probably sounds more depressing than I intend it to be, but all that to say that our efforts will always be our efforts, whether or not there's a spotlight on it, and continuing that and being able to share back and create meaningful relationships to combat that silence and that isolation has really been like a rewarding and beautiful process, because it doesn't depend on someone publishing a story about what we're doing. We're just seeing the results between ourselves and understanding that like things are happening and things are being built. So I think that's where my head is at.
Thank you, Laura. And Zev.
Yeah, this question of how to keep it going once the obvious disaster is done. I mean, so it was like there was a huge surge of mutual aid organizing in response to COVID beginning in early 2020, and then that kind of blossomed and then just mostly dissipated, right? And we really learned from that, watching how that happened, because we had been doing mutual aid organizing before that. We did it through it, we did it after, and there was like all this attention, all this press, and everybody was talking about it. And then it was like, wait, where did it go? And what I came to believe from that is that we're born into such a doggedly individualistic society that recreating habits of actual cooperation and different systems, that we don't just snap back to our kind of retreat back to our normal individualistic society in many different ways, is a long-term project. And it's a project of imagination, and it's a project of healing, because the reason why we all tend to retreat to these kind of individualist survival patterns where we're not sharing resources and not getting together and not risking more, is that we didn't get born and raised into a culture where people did that, and we grew up thinking that's normal, and we learned all of the little emotional and relational skills to do that well. And so how do we develop those emotional relational skills and kind of keep the rhythm going past the big disaster? And what I've started to put words on is this cycle of risk and rupture and repair. It's where if a group of people can figure out how to risk together, that we already do that when we respond to disasters, but we risk all at once because we see the clear need, and we show up and we put our time in and our resources and we risk all of that. But what about when it's not a disaster? What can risk look like? Well, that can be like starting a savings pool, or starting a little food collective where people cook food for each other and share it, or perhaps looking at a community garden startup or housing co-op, have more skin in the game.
I don't know if you got it. I got an email.
Sorry, I'm trying to mute.
Thanks. And then people get to see how they show up for each other, develop some more trust, then come back and try the next project that has a little bit more skin in the game. So that's what we try to figure out, is like through these community conversations, like I was mentioning earlier, figuring out what's a good starting place in my group of people just right around me. We call it a crew or a pod, to take some more risks, to develop some next actions, maybe start a study group or a reading group where we get together and read about cooperatives and have a meal once a month, and do a project, right? And then that gets a rhythm of relating going, and then more ideas can hatch out of that as people kind of learn more and figure out what they need more. But it's some kind of rhythmic thing that doesn't ask too much, but also asks something of us. And it's not going to look the same as it did during a disaster. We just have to know that it's not going to look and feel the same as it did during the disaster. But it creates capacity for when the disaster does come, because then we have the trust and the systems in place to respond to it more powerfully. So that's what I'll say.
Thank you so much. We're nearing the end of our hour and a half together, which is, I both believe it because so much information has been shared, and also surprising because the time has moved so quickly. I do want to open up the floor if any of our speakers have any last words that have come to mind, or responding to folks in the chat. And one of the things I wanted to lift up was one of my questions that I didn't ask, that I wonder if that isn't part of the answer to the question we were just asked, which is, how do we sustain things in the quiet times? And one of the things we're talking about is resiliency and preparation for the next event. It's a big thing that we are talking a lot about in this webinar series. And I do think that it's something that is increasingly something that communities are more ready to have that conversation in local governments and other entities, and really digging in on what we can have in place. And so one of my questions for y'all was going to be something along the lines of, are there communities that you might have worked with that had systems in place that made them more ready, or that you wish had been in place? So we'll leave that there. But I think too that I think that's maybe a topic for another webinar. But and to lift up the folks with disabilities and the systems that maybe folks are learning to have in place to help bring along folks who are otherwise being left behind, is a great question. I do see a hand up from Mary. So yeah, go ahead, Mary. We have a minute. You're on mute. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm off now.
You are. I can hear you.
Hello, hi, how's everybody doing? I came in the last half hour, it seems, so I missed a lot, and I'm kind of disappointed because it seemed like I was talking a great deal of some of my concerns is with the natural disaster, whether it's man-made or it's, like Hurricane Katrina, East Palestine. My biggest concern is, even after it's all said and done, when a disaster first happens, there's always this help, this rush of help. But the aftermath, after 5 years, 2 years, 3 years, these people are still suffering. And my concern, because I live in the Mon Valley in Pittsburgh, PA, where I'm close to a steel mill, I'm close to a railroad track. My biggest concern is the aftermath. Like 2 years later, these people are still suffering. And it just don't seem like they're still getting that help. They get the help at the beginning because it's all over the news, all over the radio, but there's not that help for mentally. Like the town I live in, it's mostly elderly people. When the kids graduate, they leave here, they usually don't come back. So how can you get, and a lot of them's not like computer, or even on their cell phones. How are you able to get that information out to them if you can't reach them? So that's my biggest concern, helping the seniors and the young who just can't get the help, even after it's all said and done, because there's always help out there at the beginning, but after it's all said and done, there's no help. It seems like there's no help. And so that's my biggest concern. How can we keep that information flowing? How do you get that information out there? As I said, I came in at the last minute, and I do apologize. So hopefully y'all have another one of these. and
We
stuff too.
do, and we will send the recording out. So if you're here, then you'll get a copy of the recording. If you
Okay.
have time to watch it, you can catch that first hour. But this conversation has definitely shown us that we definitely need to keep having these questions, and those
Mhm.
ones you're asking, Mary, are just I think they're the perfect ones for us to be thinking about as we close out. Because I don't want to keep people over time. It looks like there's some folks chatting, sending some notes from the Pittsburgh area that were really excited about what you said. And I also wanted to, Matthew had a similar question in the chat, which is how do you get a hold of these folks that need the support but might not have access to the social
Mhm.
media, to the technology? That is, obviously the easiest way to get a hold of folks. They don't have that. And then
Mhm.
Holly had the great example of those nosy neighbors who know everybody. Those really are the treasure.
That'd be me.
Yes, we need more people like you, Mary. That's the heart of it. That's really the heart of it is those folks who those people that people networks is I think what it comes. We have to get off the computers and meet each other and talk to each other at the end of the day. So
Neighbors helping neighbors like they used to, borrowing sugar. You could borrow sugar from people don't even know that. I know all my neighbors. I'm one of the nosy neighbors, but you can't even borrow sugar because you don't even know your neighbor no more. I want to get back to community, where you don't have to go but so far to get help because help is right there, you know.
yes, I love that. I love that, Mary, and I'm going to let you have the last word because nobody can say it better. So it's 2:30. I'm going to let everyone back to their day as much as I'm enjoying this. And I'm going to thank you for your time and thank you for being that nosy neighbor that keeps everyone connected.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that. Yeah. All right. Thank you all.
Thanks, Dana.
So you should be able
Thanks,
to,
y'all.
there was a lot of information shared in the chat. If you